The granite in the Great Pyramid, if you look at the famous King's Chamber, its walls and its roof, the ceiling of the King's Chamber, are all made with gigantic granite blocks.
The granite quarries of Aswan hold a quiet contradiction, one carved not in myth, but in stone, harder than steel. Across their surfaces lie smooth, repeating curves that look less like the scars of ancient labor and more like the signature of something precise, controlled, almost mechanical. For generations, these markings were explained away as the slow work of pounding stones. But what if that explanation was never enough? What if the evidence has been visible all along, waiting for someone, or something, to finally see it clearly? Let's dive deeper into the story. The marks that defy the old story. For decades, the prevailing explanation seemed almost too straightforward to question. Ancient workers, armed with harder stones, repeatedly struck granite surfaces until the desired shape emerged. It was a narrative built on endurance, thousands upon thousands of impacts, slowly wearing down one of the hardest natural materials on Earth. Archaeologists embraced this model because it fit within what we understood about ancient tools and capabilities. Experimental attempts even reinforced it. Modern researchers, using similar pounding techniques, proved that granite could indeed be broken and shaped this way, albeit with immense effort and time. But that explanation begins to crack the moment you look more closely. The marks left behind in the quarry walls tell a different story. Instead of rough, irregular pits, the surfaces display smooth, curved depressions that repeat with striking uniformity. These scoops are not random. They follow consistent arcs, maintain similar depth and width, and overlap in patterns that feel deliberate rather than accidental. There is a rhythm to them, a controlled repetition that doesn't align with the chaotic nature of repeated impacts. This contrast is hard to ignore. If pounding stone against granite naturally produces fractured, uneven textures, why do these marks appear polished and precise? Why do they look less like the result of brute force and more like the path of a guided tool moving with intention? The deeper you examine them, the more the old explanation feels incomplete. So the question becomes unavoidable. Are we looking at the limits of ancient labor or the evidence of a method we still don't fully understand? The quarries of Aswan, stretching along the Nile in southern Egypt, were the backbone of some of the most ambitious construction projects in the ancient world. From colossal statues to towering obelisks, the granite extracted here helped define the scale and permanence of Egyptian architecture. At the center of this landscape lies the unfinished obelisk, a massive block of stone still anchored to the bedrock, abandoned when structural cracks made its completion impossible. Around it, deep trenches cut into the granite reveal the process of its attempted extraction. And it is along these trench walls that the most puzzling details emerge. The surfaces are covered in repeating scoop-like marks, each one remarkably consistent in size and depth. They form gentle arcs that overlap in a pattern resembling waves frozen in stone. When examined up close, these marks feel smooth to the touch, lacking the jagged edges or fractured textures typically associated with forceful impacts. Instead, they suggest a controlled removal of material, almost as if the granite had been shaved away in measured passes. Efforts to replicate these features using traditional pounding methods have consistently fallen short. The results tend to be rough, uneven, and far less precise. Even more telling is the time required. Recreating just a portion of these trenches through manual pounding would demand an extraordinary investment of labor over many years. This gap between expectation and reality is difficult to ignore. Why do the actual quarry marks display such uniformity and efficiency? Could the techniques used have been more advanced or simply different than what we've long assumed? And if the answers are already etched into the stone, what have we failed to notice until now? Grock AI enters the investigation. In 2024, a different kind of investigator entered the debate, one without prior commitments to established theories. An advanced AI system called Grok was given a task that researchers had struggled to approach objectively: analyze high-resolution images of the quarry marks and determine Purely from pattern recognition and comparison, what kind of process could have created them? It wasn't told what to expect. It wasn't guided toward traditional explanations. Its role was to observe, measure, and compare. At first, the goal seemed straightforward. Identify the geometry of the marks, measure their consistency, and match them against known cutting and shaping techniques from both ancient and modern contexts. But as the analysis deepened, the results began to diverge sharply from expectations. Rather than reinforcing the long-accepted pounding theory, Grok found that the patterns didn't behave like impact marks at all. Instead, they aligned far more closely with rotational cutting, methods defined by continuous, controlled motion. The scoops showed uniform curvature, consistent spacing, and minimal variation in depth, all pointing toward a process governed by fixed parameters rather than the natural inconsistency of human strikes. What made the findings even more compelling was the microscopic layer of evidence. Within the marks, subtle traces suggested contact with materials and processes not typically linked to simple stone tools. These details, combined with the overall geometric precision, painted a picture that felt far more engineered than improvised. Taken together, the analysis didn't just question the traditional explanation, it undermined it. If the marks weren't created by repeated impacts, then the entire framework for understanding granite work at Aswan comes into question. So what replaces it? What kind of tool or system could produce such controlled, repeatable results in one of the hardest stones on Earth? And perhaps, more importantly, if such methods existed, why is the evidence for them so elusive outside the stone itself? Precision beyond human limits. One of the most striking aspects of the analysis is the level of uniformity. Thousands of individual scoop marks were measured, revealing minimal variation in size and spacing. Each arc followed nearly the same path, as if guided by a consistent radius, rather than the unpredictable motion of a human arm. Angles of entry into the stone remained stable across large areas, suggesting a controlled approach rather than improvised strikes. While skilled workers can achieve remarkable consistency, the degree observed here pushes the limits of what unaided human effort typically produces. This doesn't mean humans couldn't have created the marks, but it suggests they may have relied on tools or techniques that imposed a level of control beyond simple handheld methods. The patterns resemble outcomes associated with guided systems, where movement is constrained and repeated with precision. So the question becomes sharper. Were ancient workers using a form of technology we don't yet understand? Or are we misinterpreting the capabilities of tools we thought we knew? And if such precision was achievable, where else might we find evidence of it? Beyond precision, there's another layer to the mystery: placement. Some of the scoop marks appear in locations that are difficult to reconcile with manual labor. In certain areas, the curves continue beneath sections of stone that were never removed, implying a cutting motion that extended into spaces too confined for a worker to physically access. Other marks appear in tight corners where swinging a tool would be nearly impossible, or on vertical surfaces at heights that would require awkward and unstable positioning. Yet despite these challenges, the marks maintain the same smooth consistency seen elsewhere. This suggests that the cutting process was not limited by the physical constraints of the human body. Instead, the motion appears continuous and independent, as though the tool itself dictated the path rather than the worker's reach. If that's the case, what kind of system could operate in such restricted spaces while maintaining uniform results? And why does the evidence seem to point toward movement unconstrained by human ergonomics? Scattered throughout the quarries are narrow vertical shafts plunging deep into the granite, some reaching depths of up to 50 feet, while remaining only a few feet wide. Traditionally, these have been interpreted as exploratory pits, used to assess the quality of stone below the surface. But this explanation raises serious challenges. The depth alone seems excessive for simple testing, and the same smooth scoop marks appear along the walls, mirroring those found in the trenches. Creating such shafts using manual pounding would be extraordinarily difficult, Imagine working at the bottom of a confined vertical space with barely enough room to move. Swinging a tool effectively would be nearly impossible. Dust and debris would quickly accumulate, limiting visibility and making breathing hazardous. Removing the excavated material would require constant effort, and maintaining light at such depths would add another layer of complexity. Yet, despite these obstacles, the shafts are clean, uniform, and remarkably consistent. So what were they really for? If they weren't just test pits, could they represent a different kind of operation altogether? And if the same unknown method created both the trenches and these deep shafts, what does that imply about the technology or techniques behind them? Hidden geometry beneath the surface. When Grock AI extended its analysis to the deep vertical shafts scattered across the quarry, the mystery intensified. These narrow pits, descending dozens of feet into solid granite, were not just feats of endurance. Their geometry revealed something far more deliberate. Instead of dropping straight down at random, some shafts subtly curved, following internal mineral veins and natural fault lines buried deep within the stone. That detail alone raises a profound problem. Those internal structures are invisible from the surface. To follow them so accurately would require either extraordinary intuitive skill or some form of insight into the stone's hidden composition, something comparable to modern geological scanning. Yet the ancient world, as we understand it, had no such tools. Even more puzzling was the consistency of the pit walls. In any manual excavation, conditions worsen with depth. Space becomes tighter, airflow decreases, visibility fades, and precision inevitably declines. But here, the walls remain smooth and uniform from top to bottom, as if the cutting method operated under the same conditions regardless of depth. It didn't slow down, didn't become rougher, didn't lose control. Grok flagged this as a critical anomaly. The process that created these shafts did not behave like human labor under physical constraints. It behaved like a controlled system, one that maintained performance even in extreme conditions. And then came the microscopic evidence. Within the scoop marks lining these pits, the AI detected faint spiral patterns, barely visible traces that align with rotational motion rather than repeated. These spirals suggest that whatever cut the stone was spinning as it worked, carving through granite in a continuous, controlled motion. Not striking, not chipping, but cutting. At an even finer scale, some granite particles appeared partially fused, as if exposed to localized heat. That detail alone contradicts the idea of cold, percussive shaping. Instead, it points toward friction or energy, concentrated enough to alter the stone at a microscopic level. Chemical traces added another layer. Residues resembling diamond dust and corundum materials used today in high-performance cutting and grinding were identified within the marks. These are not substances typically associated with simple stone tools, yet their presence suggests an abrasive process far more advanced than previously assumed. When Grok compared these findings to known cutting technologies, the closest matches were strikingly modern water jet cutting, ultrasonic vibration systems, and diamond-tipped rotary tools. Each of these methods produces smooth, precise surfaces with controlled geometry features that mirror what is seen in Aswan. But these are technologies of the industrial age. So how do their signatures appear in ancient stone? Is it possible that ancient workers developed functionally similar techniques using entirely different means? Or does this evidence point to a level of technological sophistication that has somehow slipped through the cracks of history? And if these pits were not just exploratory, but part of a larger systematic process, what exactly were they building toward? A quarry designed with knowledge we can't explain. When Grok mapped the locations of these deep shafts across the quarry landscape, a pattern emerged, one that stunned even modern geologists. The pits were not randomly placed. They aligned with subsurface features, fault lines, mineral veins, and zones of structural weakness within the granite. Today, identifying such features requires advanced tools, ground-penetrating radar, seismic surveys, and detailed geological modeling. Yet the placement of these ancient shafts suggests that whoever created them had access to similar knowledge long before such technologies existed. This implies something extraordinary. The quarrying process was not just reactive, but predictive. Workers seemed to know where the best stone lay, where fractures might occur, and where extraction would be most efficient before they ever began cutting. And it didn't stop there. The overall layout of the quarry itself reflects a level of planning that feels almost modern. Trenches and extraction zones appear positioned to minimize internal stress within the stone. Cuts follow the natural crystal structure of the granite, reducing the likelihood of fractures and maximizing usable material. Waste is minimized. Efficiency is maximized. These are not random decisions. They mirror optimization strategies used in contemporary quarry design, often guided by computer models that simulate stress distribution and material behavior. So how did ancient workers achieve similar results? One possibility is that this knowledge was built slowly over generations, through trial and error refined into expertise. But even that explanation struggles to account for the precision and consistency observed across the site. The alternative is more unsettling, that some form of analytical understanding existed, one we do not currently associate with ancient Egypt. Then there is the massive depression in the southern section of the quarry. Traditionally interpreted as a harbor or loading area, its shape and volume tell a different story when analyzed carefully. Grok proposed that this feature is not an entry point for transport, but the void left behind by removing an enormous block of granite. Based on its dimensions, the missing stone could have weighed between 3,000 and 5,000 tons. To put that into perspective, the largest known obelisks weigh only a fraction of that. Even the heaviest stones used in the pyramids are nowhere near this scale. Moving such a massive object would require engineering capabilities far beyond what we typically attribute to ancient Egypt. If this interpretation is correct, it suggests that quarry workers were not only capable of extracting such a block, but may have intended to transport it. So where did it go? Was it successfully moved, only to be lost to history? Or was the attempt abandoned, leaving behind this silent cavity as evidence of ambition that exceeded even their capabilities? And if they could attempt something on that scale, what does that say about the limits we've placed on ancient engineering? A timeline that runs backward. Perhaps the most controversial insight from Grok's analysis is not about tools or techniques, but time itself. In several areas of the quarry, simple red ochre paintings depicting birds, boats, and abstract symbols appear layered over the precision scoop marks. This detail is crucial. The paint sits in the grooves, meaning the carvings had to exist before the artwork was applied. These paintings are stylistically linked to prehistoric rock art found across the Sahara and Nile Valley, often dated thousands of years before the rise of dynastic Egypt. If that dating holds, it means the sophisticated stone cutting predates the civilization traditionally credited with it. That alone challenges the entire timeline. But the pattern goes deeper. When Grok compared different sections of the quarry, it identified a trend that runs counter to everything we expect from technological development. The oldest work, based on contextual clues, shows the highest precision, the most refined cuts, the most consistent geometry, the most advanced characteristics appear at the earliest stages. Later work, clearly associated with dynastic Egypt through inscriptions and known tool marks, is noticeably rougher, less precise, more consistent with pounding and abrasion techniques we already understand. In other words, the quality declines over time. This is the opposite of normal technological progress. Instead of improvement, we see degradation, as if earlier builders possessed capabilities that were gradually lost. This raises three unsettling possibilities. First, that advanced techniques once existed but disappeared, leaving only simplified methods behind. Second, that a pre-dynastic culture, now largely unknown, was responsible for the most sophisticated work. Or third, that our entire chronological framework is incomplete, and the peak of this civilization occurred far earlier than we currently believe. Each possibility forces a reconsideration of accepted history, and yet the evidence is not hidden. It is carved into the stone, visible to anyone willing to look closely enough. Grock AI did not uncover new artifacts or rewrite inscriptions. It simply analyzed what was already there, without bias, without attachment to established theories. By processing thousands of data points simultaneously, it revealed patterns that had gone unnoticed for generations. Now the challenge falls back to human researchers. Do we attempt to fit these anomalies into existing explanations, refining old theories to account for new details? Or do we accept that something fundamental may be missing from our understanding of the past? Because if the earliest work is truly the most advanced, then a deeper question emerges. What was lost, and why? The granite of Aswan has not changed in thousands of years. The marks are still there, as precise and enigmatic as the day they were made. What has changed is how we see them. With new tools and fresh perspectives, the familiar begins to look unfamiliar, and the simple explanations begin to fall apart. Whether this leads to rediscovered techniques, lost knowledge, or an entirely new chapter of human history, one thing is clear: the story of how ancient Egyptians cut granite is far from finished. If you found this exploration intriguing, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into ancient mysteries and hidden history.